Welcome to the Silicon Fox podcast, where we explore the habits and stories of high performers. Join us as we dive into their journeys, analyze live blood tests, and break down the science behind key biomarkers to help you optimize your health. I'm your host, Mitchell Eschner, an ex-pro soccer player, a current sponsored hybrid athlete, a health tech founder, and a longevity enthusiast. Well, hey, Jenna, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mitchell.
Yeah, absolutely. I always love to start with just an intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you're working on. Million Marker would love to hear it.
A little bit about myself. I was trained as a dietitian and environmental health scientist. I started a Million Marker right after my postdoc because I was very frustrated by my research. I figured since nobody's reading my research anyway, I should be doing something different. That was one of the reasons. Another reason was my personal journey. My fertility struggles kind of led me seeking ways to figuring out what's going on with myself. And at the time, there was no test available to measure these toxicants in our body. And we know it's linked to fertility issues. So I figured, I think it's time to leave academia and do something different.
Yeah, is that a common jump from academia to actually building, commercializing research, all that kind of stuff?
It wasn't like supernatural, I guess, for a lot of people, because many people thinks you need work experience and to start a company.
Yeah.
But for me, I kind of felt like I didn't really have other choices. Oh, not that I didn't have other choices. It's more just like it's more natural. Since if you don't build a company for what I want to study, there seems no other way to do it.
That's fair.
I'll give you an example. So when I was doing postdoc, one of the reasons I was doing postdoc was that I wanted to do intervention trials so we can figure out what to do with these chemicals and then what to do with changing behaviors so then people can adopt for a healthier lifestyle. But with the support from NIH, a typical NIH grant, our grant runs about $5 million.
Yep.
With that sort of grant, you can recruit about 400 people, follow them over 2 years. You have great internal validity for your research study, but can you really generalize? So, and then a lot of the chemicals we study for my past research at the same time now at Million Marker, we're talking about very low dose exposures. So meaning you have very tiny exposure over time. So if you don't have a large sample size, there's no way to study them.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, give us the really brief rundown. What is Million Marker? What are you working on now?
At Million Marker, we test people for their environmental toxicant, namely endocrine disrupting chemicals, common ones. We test about 13 of them. We provide the test results with actionable insights so people can do something about it, avoiding exposures, reducing exposures, and increase their environmental health literacy and then live healthier. We also provide counseling. We provide product recommendations. So the whole goal is to making this educational and also making it actionable.
Okay. Yeah. I like that part. I find that I asked this in like so many different companies that work on things that provide data. I myself am a founder in a medical company that works in providing data. The next step, like what's the actionable part? You just touched on it. Can you go a little bit deeper into that? You guys provide results. So what are the key toxins you provide results for? And then what's the next step? So you provide levels. Is the actionable insight a product recommendation? Is it a change of lifestyle, change of environment? What's the typical action plan?
All of the above.
Okay.
Okay, so we currently test for 13 chemical metabolites.
Okay.
That's including BPA, bisphenol families, BPA, BPS, BPF. 5 other phthalates, that's including low molecular weight and high molecular weight phthalates. We can go into that a little bit deeper. Parabens, another common hormone disrupting chemical used as preservatives, as well as oxybenzone. So it's a urine test. You pee in a cup, send it to us, we get it tested, and we provide your levels and how you compare with the national average, which is taken from the National Health Nutrition Examination Survey. In terms of actionable results part, like what you can do, if you fill out an exposure journal prior to taking your test, we analyze your behaviors. So we identify what are the potential sources of your exposure, and then we provide those product reviews. So then what are the lifestyle behaviors associated with your exposure, or the particular product associated with your exposure, then you can swap out those products or changing those lifestyle behaviors, and you can come back, get tested again to see your level actually drop.
That's very fair. Yeah, we'll get into reversal in a second. I'm interested, just so we set some groundwork. Like, can you go over the science very briefly of just BPA, phthalates? What is it? Why does it matter? Why are they bad?
Yeah, so these are hormone disrupting chemicals, man-made.
Okay.
And the reason we call them for hormone disrupting chemicals was because they mess with your hormones. They either mimics your hormones, like for example, BPA mimics estrogen, like phthalates actually blocks testosterone.
Yeah.
The reason we don't want these chemicals in our body is that you don't actually want your hormone to be messed up. So to backtrack a little bit, like hormone literally governs every single bodily function you have, from metabolism to sleep to your mood to your brain function, development, everything is governed by hormone, and they act at such tiny amount. You can't even see it with like your eyes.
Right.
Basically, it's like you only need like one drop. Think about one drop of water in like 25 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's how much it required to cause an action.
Yeah.
And it has this domino effects, right? And then you think about hormones, it's like they work kind of collaboratively. Think about the orchestra. So if you have a key out of sync when you're playing in an orchestra, just think about the whole melody. It's just not going to be good.
Yeah.
Same as a hormone. So you don't want these things in you. They have no business in your body whatsoever, only do harm. So then you just don't want them.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, so we've established they're bad. A question I have all the time, and I'm interested in this space, is like the supply chain. How far up the stack does it go? Because we have all these talks of like organic, non-organic, plastic free, non-plastic free. It's super hard to promise, but people do. Is it in the soil? Is it, and especially because I know these problems are pretty prominent in the West. There's so many statistics thrown out about the West and the Western Hemisphere of toxins and different kinds of stuff. Is it the foods we eat? Is it the air that we breathe, and what's causing it? Especially because we, in other areas, we don't have so many manufacturing plants, and some we do, but yet we have all these different results. So I'm just kind of wondering, how far up the stack does it go?
They go deep.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. One question we get asked all the time, like, when we provide these actionable, insights to folks, one of the insights is don't use anything scented. Don't use any fragrance or any product with fragrance. So if you think about it, like what are fragrance made of? And nowadays, when people switch to better choices, they choose essential oil. We get asked all the time. It's like, is essential oil actually good for you, or is it bad? Talking about the supply chain, right? If you think about how essential oils are being made, it's distilled from plants, and then how are plants collected, right? And then how our plants are grown. So you can think about the supply chain, right? So to distill the plants, you need equipment. Okay, is your equipment made of plastic or not? Is the tubing plastic? So when you're doing the distilling, it's in high temperature. So if you're using plastic equipment, all that toxins, all these toxicants, chemicals will just leach into that essential oil, right?
Yeah.
And then if you move up the supply chain, like how is the plant being collected? Are they being collected in, plastic?
Yeah, that was the question.
Right?
Is like, how are they being collected? Is it even like deeper in the soil? I mean, what's the
Right. So if you're using a lot of pesticides in that essential oil plant, that pesticides will eventually shows up, right? And then this have to do with the soil. So it goes all the way up.
That's fair. And like the U.S. specifically, let's talk about the U.S. specific. Is that the typical root cause? Is where we supply different goods from, or has been more the pack? Like, what is the? I know that all of it's the problem, but what's kind of been the leading problem, if there is one?
I think the packaging right now is a huge issue, and also the manufacturing process. And the deeper issues, there's no compliance, and nobody is really setting a standard for doing this, right? And in the past a few decades, plastic has been everywhere,
right?
And it's convenient, and also people lack the knowledge that, okay, many people still today, like, we have customers coming to us that are still surprised that they cannot microwave plastic.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
we always tell people, don't touch receipts, don't like a microwave plastic. A lot of people are still surprised.
Crazy.
They still don't know, right? So if you're talking about like, okay, educating farmers, hey, don't use this equipment, they might not even know this is causing an issue. It was just like convenience.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm kind of interested in the application portion of it. It goes up far to the supply chain, right? It's problematic in every capacity. What's the worst of it in the applications? I saw like some crazy statistics in the US in the past 4 decades, 50 to 60% worse sperm counts in men. Is fertility the leading problem? What's like the byproduct? So people are eating microplastics, toxins. Is fertility being affected most, or is there overall? I mean, you mentioned metabolic health as well, but just like what does it disrupt the most?
Oh, it's so many things. So fertility, yes, it's being in the news a lot because we saw fertility like rate is declining. People are having less kids, and more people are using IVF
IVF, right?
with assisted reproduction, and it's very costly
Yeah.
and it's very emotional draining too. So that has been in people's mind, and also it's been linked to ADHD, neurological development issues in kids. And it's not easy for parents to deal with kids with ADHD. And besides that, we also see obesity epidemic, diabetes epidemic, and these chemicals are also being called obesogens and
Mm.
diabesogens because they're disrupting the metabolic pathways for these conditions.
Yeah, there was two super interesting things I found when I was prepping for this episode. Was one, yeah, actually just fetuses being grown and like the impacts of different toxins in their bodies, and the ADHD. I mean, there's just crazy spikes in rates in ADHD and autism, and there are like interesting correlations that I've just found. Um, the question I've always had, like, how long does it stay in the body? Back to, we talked about, yes, there's an action plan of changing your environment, different supplementation, all that kind of stuff, but you think a lot about reversal. So we've come to these conclusions. Say someone's a Gen Zer now. Is there a point of no return? Is there a reversal period? Is this a generational problem to the point where it's not reversed just because it's so deep into the supply chain? Like, how have you guys thought about that on a macro level?
I think it can be reversed, and that's part of the reason I think why million marker exists. Talking about how long they stay in your body, there are two camps. So one camp is transient chemicals. Those are the ones we can test in urine. Those chemical usually leaves your body within 24 to 48 hours, which is very encouraging. So that means your body actually have a detox system to get rid of them.
Okay.
So if you avoid your exposure, your body just naturally get rid of them. The issue is that people get repeated exposure day in and day out, so they never fully get rid of it.
Hmm.
So when you equip with this information, then you can take actions and really go. You basically have to go out of your way
Right.
to get rid of them. There's another class of chemicals called persistent chemicals. Those are the PFAS, the PFOA. So these
Right.
that we're talking about. Those can actually stay in your body for decades. Some of them. If you test, you and my blood today, we can still find DDT, which DDT has been banned for decades. It's because it's persistent. So it's really important for people to avoid future exposures for persistent chemicals. But once you expose, there's not much you can do to get rid of them. We also get asked all the time, like, how do I get rid of like
Right.
persistent chemicals, right? So the only like sort of more valid study I have seen is that okay, if you want to get rid of your PFAS, you can donate your blood. But then again,
Oh,
like
interesting.
who's gonna use your
Right.
donated blood, right?
Yeah. Very interesting. Um, you mentioned something about long-term effects. There's so much talk in the longevity, in the health, even just like the basic interested about health at all community of long-term effects on things, even as simple as Advil. And that's just so debated, despite the fact that there are publications, there is peer review. Advil has been around for some time now. And so you look at long-term effects, cancer rates are super high. And a lot of different things are just really problem. Chronic kidney disease, or just chronic disease in general, is growing really fast. 6 in 10 people have chronic diseases. Have you guys seen any correlations or had any interesting findings um, between like these exposure to toxins and true long-term effects that are truly correlated? Given there's just so many factors in society, have you found that they are exactly correlated to this, or is it really blurry as to what's causing a lot of the long-term effects?
It's all association. Unfortunately, we've seen causal studies in animal models, but in human, it's all correlation.
Okay.
It's exactly for the same reason that you just described. It's impossible to do a study, well, it would be ethically impossible to do a study to look at prospectively, like what are these chemicals going to cause an effect over time. because you basically, okay, you can't expose to a group of pregnant women with these chemicals and observe what happens, right?
Right.
So it's all correlation. But what we have seen is that people with high exposure to these chemicals are having worse health outcomes. That's including, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and neurological effect, all of these things.
Do you think time fixes that question? And if we have more time to evaluate, we do establish stronger correlations, or do you think there's just too many factors?
I mean, the epidemiological like evidence we have is already mounts of them over like 30, 40 years. So how long do you need
Yeah, that's
to
a fair
actually
question.
see that, right?
Yeah, that's
So
fair.
if you already know, like why don't you want to take preventative approach to these things?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I agree. I'm in the preventative camp. Um, I'm kind of interested. There's a lot of toxins out there. You mentioned a few, and I think we should dive into which ones are there. But something in health that happens all the time, especially when it comes to fads, is people want to test for one thing, and then they realize there's actually 100 within that realm to test for. So, how many toxins do you guys test for? How many really are out there? Have there been really strong studies on which ones really matter, or is there just a lot of unknown in this space?
It's a can of worms.
Yeah, I mean,
So
as is anything in health, but
right.
this specifically, I'm
Right.
interested.
We test for 13 of them. This is only the ice of the tip of the iceberg,
Okay.
because these are the ones that actually have been studied. There are actually over 350,000 chemical out there. We actually only have about 1% of these chemicals with sufficient safety data. And if you look at a new report just that being published not so long ago on like how many plastic chemicals are out there, that's like 80,000 or even
Mm,
more, right? And you can't possibly test for everything. The
right.
technology is developing rapidly. That now, these testing that today we do, what we call them targeted testing.
Yeah.
That means, you know exact target, and then you want to look at exact how much is
So
being,
the person chooses what they want to target test for, or you guys choose for them?
we chose, because the testing, it turned out, hasn't been super easy.
Right.
Finding a lab that can actually
It's not.
offer
Yeah.
these testing, it was not easy. At least it wasn't easy for me when I
It's
first
hard.
started.
Yeah.
um so in order to have like a really large testing menu, first of all, it's really costly, and then second is many chemicals you actually don't even have the standard, so you can't even run the test.
Hmm.
So many chemicals out there are proprietary for companies,
Right.
and you can't even buy the standard, so you can't even test for them.
Yeah. You kind of touched about this with, you said a little bit earlier with gold standards about national averages. It spiked the question that actually has to do with this. What is that? How are they testing for national averages? What's the gold standard in the space, because it's so new?
Okay, this is also really interesting. So the national average is done by the National Health Nutrition Examination Survey. It's run by the CDC. They run this every other year.
Okay.
um, US probably have one of the largest, what we call these studies called biomonitoring studies. US actually have one of the largest, most comprehensive one. EU, the entire EU tests for about maybe around 9,000 people. The enhanced tests for about 3,000 people every other year. The issue here is that the 3,000 people that's being tested every other year are not the same people.
Hmm.
So it's a true cross-sectional study. It gives you the snapshot over time, but you can't really tell, okay, out of all these people, like who is
Yeah.
developing what condition with this type of exposure. And
That's
out of the
interesting.
3,000 people, about half of them are kids and
Oh
half of
wow.
them are adults. So if you think about it, like, if I want to narrow down to my gender, my age, my ethnicity, and my location for this sort of exposure, like what you have, like what, 5 people looking like you, how generalizable is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
But having this data is still better than not having it, right? At least it gives us like a trend, letting us know, okay, what are the in the population level, like what are the chemical looking like right now. Since the BPA has been banned, we actually have seen a drop in population levels for BPA exposure.
Very interesting. What do you think of synthetic data for this use case?
Synthetic data, well, you need the real people to tell like real exposures, right? How do you like make synthetic data for this sort
Would you base it? No, but I'm saying, would you base it and just kind of multiply and either have some kind
um
of standard deviation that you consistently move, or you start to draw conclusions, say, hey, this ethnicity, this, again, back to like, if I have a subset of 10 people, I can then try to inflate it to 100 and find correlations and just have more training data, especially as we incorporate different kind
Right.
of cool technological tools.
I think people are definitely doing modeling with this sort of data, and then they use modeling to forecast, say, healthcare costs and
That's what I mean,
other
right?
things, right? They do that, and but I think more biomonitoring is definitely needed, and also on more diverse populations, because there's always limitations with modeling, right?
Yeah.
And until you have like a larger sample size and you have real data, you have that ground truth.
Yeah, yeah. This is an interesting application as well in blood tests that I've discovered a bunch. Is the averages are actually of the past 10,000 or 20,000 tests, rather than some like true health
Right.
metric. Because it's just so hard to establish what's healthy for you, what's healthy for me.
Right. It's also same as many other standard. For example, nutrition standard, right? So like vitamin, for example, vitamin D. Like a lot of people now being marked as lack of or vitamin D deficient, but vitamin D like levels literally have been dropped. Like the standard have been dropped for like more than half or like a bunch of it like just a few years ago because the population level were dropping. So
Mm,
it's not a true stand. It's not your baseline. It's not the typical. It's not the precision medicine that we've been hoping for.
right.
That okay, this standard applies to me, but it doesn't. Same as also same thing with drug dosing. A lot
Yeah.
of the drug dosing are based on white men in a certain age group.
Yep.
That does not apply to most women, and it definitely does not apply, say, like I'm Asian, and that probably doesn't apply to me.
Yeah. I mean, it blurs a lot of like what is actually healthy.
Exactly.
So, do you think then it's a net positive? People going out to build data sets for these kinds of applications. Is that something you guys are interested at all? Like, does Million Marker look at cool, unique data sets in this space?
Currently, there's no cool data set for environmental toxins.
So, someone's got to go build them. Yeah.
We're hoping to build one.
Okay.
I think it's really important because I mentioned that earlier. It's very hard to study the true effect of these toxins because we can't expose to people, and then it's small dose over time. So it's really important. Another thing I haven't mentioned is that we have been studying these chemicals one at a time,
Mm.
right?
So
But
not even in unison of like how they interact.
exactly.
Oh
So
wow.
you have been like literally exposed to thousands of them all at once.
Right.
But how do we even study this mixture impact? There aren't a lot of studies on that. So
Wow.
there have been studies studying 5 chemical at a time, right? Or 5 class of chemical, but we don't really know. Another area is that talking about hormone disrupting chemical, we have been studying these bad synthetic actors. But if you think about it, there are plant phytoestrogens, like for
Mhm.
example, those are like being deemed as good, good stuff, like soy, for example.
Yeah.
Those are phytoestrogens, right? Like we have only seen, most of the time we have seen good studies on phytoestrogens, like a good stuff. But those are also hormone disruptors, right?
Interesting.
So like, if you eat a bunch of soy and having the good phytoestrogens, and then you have been exposed to like say a bunch of BPA, the bad stuff, like how do the two actually interact? We don't really know.
Mm.
Like
How would you even go about, like, what would be the process of finding that? I mean,
so
every patient would be so unique probably in their interactions.
exactly. So that's why I think we really need the big data sets. And then now there is approach for using non-targeted approach. That means that you scan the whole, your metabolome and your, whether it's blood or your urine, to look for any possible targets. So then you can use that. But right now, that method does not have the precision and the accuracy to actually detect everything, and also to be able to identify everything. That's also hard. But I think it's coming. But somebody needs to build this, like biobanking these samples,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then also understanding people's intake, right? If I just like having your urine or having your blood, but I don't really know what's the input, that's also really hard to draw correlations.
That's fair.
And that's also part of the reason we want people to fill out an exposure journal
Mhm.
prior to taking the test. So then we can actually understand, okay, where are your exposures coming from? And can you do something about it? Can we actually give you more personalized like recommendations?
I think it's gonna be super. I absolutely love what you guys do, because I think now if I can order a at-home test for toxins, like an at-home blood test, like I can kind of become my operating system of health and really understand and draw my own correlations. I think it's just going to be so hard be able to aggregate so much data to actually build true data sets off this. But if I can do it for myself with at-home
Hmm.
tests, it makes it pretty easy. I'm kind of interested. Are there other tests in the market? Of course, you guys are probably leading this. I saw that you were one of the only ones, and I've wanted to get tested before, and I have not seen any. So glad to see there's some solutions. Are there other tests in the market? Are there other coming out? I know a big name in this space is Brian Johnson. Would love to hear your thoughts on kind of what he's doing. I know he has actually his own set of tests, I believe, that coming out or out. Kind of just shed some color on that.
I think he's definitely a pioneer in the longevity space, right? He's like using his money and using his own body to do experiment, and that's very aspiring, and I think that's cool. In terms of his tests, I've seen he's got some typical blood panels, longevity panels, checking your LDL and all
Right.
your hormones. I think he even got like a MRI scan. Those are really good. In
Yeah.
terms of toxin, I know he has actually many people, like once he launched his microplastic test and a lot of people sent it to me. I was like, oh, did you know like Brian Johnson had a microplastic test? I think that's great, that having a test that people can actually see like how many microplastic particles are in their blood. My issue with the test is I'm not really sure how his lab or the lab he's working with dealing with contamination,
Mm.
because microplastics is literally in the air, in the water, on the surface, everywhere. So if you think about the whole collection process, you collect you do a finger prick, you put it on a piece of paper, and you ship it. Like
That all
this
has.
process, like
Right.
could have contamination. So then when the lab is it measuring how much is your internal thing the lab is measuring versus the contamination? Also, the contamination could happen in the lab too.
Right.
So there is one Australian lab funded by the Mindru Foundation, and they literally build a stainless steel lab. There's
Oh
like
wow.
no plastic component
For microplastic
for
testing.
microplastic
Wow.
testing to study microplastic in the brain. It was like literally whole stainless steel. So if you think
Interesting.
about it, it's like, okay, I'm not sure how much to trust that
Right.
test, because I don't really know how much is my internal, like my own exposure to microplastic, or it's actually from the contamination of collecting the
Right.
sample. But it's a start. So if you keep repeating the test, and then maybe you can, as you mentioned, you can kind of establish some internal standards
Yeah.
for yourself, and then if you can see the trend, that's not bad. Also, since there's no, so with the chemical that we're testing, at least CDC is testing for it. With microplastic, nobody's doing the testing.
Just because
So
it's so hard in terms of
because
contamination.
it's hard and it's also new. There's like no standard like methodologies.
Right.
Even for counting, some people could use different methodologies. So how do you compare? You literally compare apple to oranges.
Is there a standard unit at least? I'm not too well versed in the space of how they
So
test.
some people right now, a lot of people use imaging technique to count how many microplastic chemicals,
Okay.
but then they need, like in terms of sample prep, there's a lot of things can happen in the lab processes. So if those are not standardized, that it's
Right.
very hard to compare. So unless a lot of people are using blueprints like a microplastic test, it's very hard to establish a data set
Yeah.
and then for comparison.
That's fair. What do you? We didn't cover your guys' process. What does it look like now to go get a million marker test kit?
The test is like, it's pretty simple. You order it online, same as any direct to consumer test, and then we encourage people. It's not mandatory, but we encourage people to do the exposure journal prior to sending your urine sample.
Is there like a time frame on that? For like a week, a day? What does that look
The
like?
day before you take
Oh,
your
just like what
urine.
I did yesterday.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. What you did yesterday, 24 hours prior,
Okay.
because these are transient chemicals, right? So because they stay in your body between 24 to 48 hours, so we ask you to take an exposure journal before you take your test. Then you take the first morning void the next day, and then you send it back to us. We get it analyze those 13 chemical metabolites. Then we report back your levels, how you compare with the national average,
Okay.
and then based on your lifestyle audit, we will analyze that data, letting you know what are the lifestyle factors that's associated with your high exposure or low exposure, and what are the products associated. We even analyze the product ingredients of all the products that you're using or reported, because again, we can only test a limited number of chemicals. There are so many, what we call it, ingredients of concerns out there. So we let you know. So next time you purchase a product, you can buy a better one without these ingredients of concern.
And I might have missed this, but is this via urine, via blood? What's the
Urine.
urine
Urine.
collection? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I'm just very bullish. This could be super interesting where I have like a CGM, a blood test, and all these correlations all at once. Kind of interested back to the actionable part. Would like to get a little bit more granular here. You've clearly well versed in the space. What are some true action plans preemptive to testing? So I want to like starting today. I want to improve toxicity in my body. What are some key things to do?
That's great. That's actually part of our goal. We generate a lot of educational materials. So even people don't want to take the test because we sell the test right now at $2.99. We barely
Okay.
make any money.
Yeah.
We barely break even because the testing cost is still really high.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal here is getting everyone start thinking about it and then start changing behavior. There are stuff that you can do that's free. You don't even need to take the test. So first of all is like avoid plastic as much as possible.
But in what sense? Because like I go to a store, I buy food in plastic. Like, don't do that. I mean, microwave. I have not been doing that for a while. That's like that's an easy one. That's a big one in my household. But like buying in plastic. I mean, I don't drink out of plastic. But like, how deep does it go, and what's the really optimal? That's still kind of feasible.
That's depending on you how far you want to go. A lot of people just think, I mean, plastic is so convenient and it's impossible to completely get rid of it. So I always encourage people to do what you can. Think about this, your body, think about this as your like building up your body burden. So your body burden is like, say, a cup of water. You just don't want it to get too full,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you cannot avoid plastic, I think it's the time that, say, you're in a hospital. You get hospitalized, you go into the hospital, there's no way you can avoid plastic. Everything in the hospital is plastic, and that's not avoidable because you needed them.
Right.
So you want to save your like burden. You want to save your extra, ounce of water like for that.
Right.
So when you are healthy, when you are not sick, then you want to avoid as much as possible. And I think the most important thing is food storage, like at home, right? Don't microwave plastic, but also store your food in a glass container, in a stainless steel container. Don't use like plastic Tupperware. Don't use that saran wrap. I've seen people like use a plastic Tupperware, put a saran wrap on top, and stick into the microwave.
Yeah.
Okay, that's double whammy.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Beyond plastic, is there anything else? Because like I hear plastic, plastic, plastic. Is that really the key indicator, or is there things that we do on a day-to-day basis that we may not realize are causing toxins that are not plastic?
Okay, that's a good question. The second that leads me to the second tip is to avoid fragrance. So
Oh yeah,
any
like
in
even
your
cologne and
yes,
oh wow, okay,
yes, all of it.
really good to know.
So fragrance is it's sort of a this blob of many ingredients of concerns. That could be fragrance could be made of over 3,000 chemicals, and that could be really harmful to you. And fragrance are used in from personal care to like household product, laundry, cleaning, everything could add scent or fragrance. So avoid fragrance is number 2. And that's easy.
Do you believe any of the ones that are chemical free? I mean, it's pretty hard to be truly chemical free, but like the really naturally made ones, have you found any ones that are useful, or just point blank? If I were to be fully committed, just fragrance free.
Fully committed, fragrance free,
Okay.
because it's hard to, we talked about like how deep the supply chain goes, right?
Yeah.
There's no way you can control. Many brands actually don't even know their products are contaminated because they're not doing routine testing.
Yeah.
We started doing some pilot study on testing, and we actually established a nonprofit just to do product testing.
Wow.
Was because we literally found there are customers that used our test and then follow the instructions, use really good brand. We analyzed the ingredient labels and supposed to be low tox or toxin free. They still came back with elevated level with everything documented. We're like, what is going on? And that's when we did like a round of pilot testing, looking into, okay, out of all these products our customer used, like, okay, what are actually in these products? And to our surprise, we found there are so many products that's labeled, phthalate free, BPA free, low tox, everything came back with super high levels. And it was just like, okay, what's going on here? And then we approached brands and then we asked them. They had no idea. Many brands had no idea their products are contaminated because either they've been lied by their suppliers or manufacturers, or nobody even know because nobody's doing the testing.
Yeah.
So I would say the safest choice is just to avoid fragrance whatsoever, all of it. No essential oil, just no fragrance, no scent. And also, don't get fooled by unscented, because unscented is
Th-
actually a scent.
that's really funny. I'm totally a fool for that. I totally have done that before, so it's good to know. I mean, I think a lot of people just don't even realize it. I mean, the statistic I read was 93% of people have detectable levels of BPA in the US, which is absolutely wild. So clearly, like, there's a lot of things. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, or are those the two key, plastics and
Two key,
fragrance?
and also don't use extra products, because we actually have seen there's a direct correlation with how many products you use and your exposure
Is
levels.
this even as far as like vitamins, or like when you say products, what do you mean?
Personal care
Okay,
products,
personal
household
care.
cleaning products. So reduce your routine, right? Like on average, many women, actually women use more products than
Right.
men, and many women use up to like 30, 40 products a day, which is a lot. So if you can reduce your product use, like I'll give an example. Before I started Mill Marker, I was using, I use a shampoo, I use a conditioner, I use like a face wash, whatever.
Right.
Like, so that's like three products since I started this. Then seeing these trends, now I use one thing. I just use a shampoo bar. Like,
Yeah.
I ditched all the plastic packaging, because even the product is good, if a brand is using a shitty packaging, that's gonna leach into the product, and then you apply it to yourself, right? And then also like product was rinse off versus leave on, so your deodorant is like,
Mm.
it's leave on, so it stays on your body. So yeah, for that deodorant, okay, think about
Yeah.
using
I've
fragrance free versus, for a shampoo you actually rinse off, that exposure is less than like leave on
right.
products.
I've seen some scary stuff about like Old Spice or just different companies and deodorant specifically. Yeah. What are some overhyped detox myths? I know you see a lot of people and you recommend a lot of products. There's just so much about detox, and it's such a consumer game now, where like you have detox drinks and all these kinds of things. What
I
have you
think it's
seen?
like the detox myth is people think that, you drink some like juice, for example, like fads, like that can help you with detox.
Yeah.
And or if you just take this supplement magic pill and then you can just detox everything, that's like such a myth. And I think I felt like there's no easy and convenient, there's no convenient way of doing it. Like you literally have to go out of your way all the time. So if you like one day you want to like, have a cheat day, for example, you're going to get that exposure, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
So you just constantly have to go out of your way. But I think once people build a habit of, adapting to a low tox lifestyle, then it just become natural. You don't even need to think about it. Like, go to a store, don't take that receipt.
Yeah.
That can become a habit, right?
Right.
Don't microwave plastic, that can become a habit. And then some of the stuff that you can just do one time investment. For example, like if you buy like a glass Tupperware at home, that gonna last way longer than the plastic Tupperware, and you just do it once.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of interested, shifting gears a little bit more to policy. I think it's a really big one here, especially because we talked about how deep in the supply chain these problems run, and so clearly there's some political involvement. Kind of interested. It's expensive, right? Getting glass Tupperware, all that kind of stuff. Have you seen it? Like, are there clear correlations between socioeconomic classes, or in fact, maybe inverse correlations where higher the fancier stores have more plastics for fancier packaging? Are there interesting correlations or things that you found there?
It's really interesting. There's definitely a disparity play here. Um, so a lot of people who can't afford a million marker test are, I would call them like worried well, or people who are highly educated with disposable income already have prior knowledge to these toxins and come to use our test.
Right.
That's the majority of our paid customers. And how many people today can actually afford a $299 test, right? That's also another question. And then there are a ton of study actually showing that there's a disparity here, that people with low income or low socioeconomic status, they actually get higher exposure.
Hmm.
And these exposure are not just from these chemicals, right? It could be from like where they live. For example, if you live near the freeway, or if you live in a like not so great neighborhood, you would get higher air pollution exposure,
Right.
for example. Or if you live near like a fracking site, or if you live near agricultural field, you would get higher exposure. And you can't ask people to move, right?
Yeah.
And also, we're talking about actionable stuff. So personal care product you can remove, you can change, but it's very hard for people to, hey, I can't tell people to like move, like change your apartment, or like buy a new house,
Right. Right.
right? That's really hard. Or even just putting like a whole like house filtration system. Talking about action plan is another tip is use a water filter.
Yeah.
Um, but if you want to go like, all
It's expensive.
right, it's expensive. So if you have a whole house filtration system, that's pretty expensive. So there are like these large ticket items that it costs money for people to do it. So there's definitely disparity play here. And then we also have seen that um, black women have higher exposure to these chemicals because of the products that they're using or they're being marketed to, like hair
Oh,
straighteners,
interesting.
for example, like skin condition, like whitening creams. All these things are
Very
really,
interesting.
really bad.
Yeah.
But they're being marketed to a specific population, and they're pretty expensive too.
Right.
So there's definitely a disparity play here, and we definitely have seen the trend. So, which means like the whole policy really, really important to remove these chemicals or making a stricter chemical policy.
Yeah. What is that you kind of just touched on that last part of my question? I mean, new administration. Uh, are there things that you want to see from them? I can't remember if I've heard RFK talk about things like this. Like, I'd actually love to get your thoughts on things that he said maybe in this space before. You're probably more well versed in that
So,
capacity.
so I actually think in terms of policy, we do have decent policy. The issue here is there's no compliance when once
Compliance
the
for
for the
when you say
policy.
okay.
So, for example, like California has established like a safer cosmetic policy. That means cosmetic company cannot use this, and that chemical, but it's only limited to intended use.
Hmm.
So when we talk about contaminations in the supply chain, these are could be unintended, right? But then like who's
Yeah.
gonna
Who's going to enforce that?
pay for it? Who's gonna enforce that? Who's gonna do it, right?
Right.
And when we talk to the Department of Public Health, we're like, okay, we want to do this, and then we want to do more testing, and then how can we work together? And they mentioned, okay, if you have enough data, then we can actually use the data to push the Attorney General to establish a compliance program because there's no compliance program. And that's the same thing with many other government policy that we have today is that, okay, you have the policy established, but companies or whoever is not going to be caught guilty until you can show they've been caught. So that's a problem. So I think like, okay, with our existing policy, I want to see more compliance program to actually use analytical testing. People lie, but instrument doesn't lie.
Right. Do you think there's enough education in this space? Because like, what do you really policy set and you seem to in accordance with some of the policies, but when it comes to like the compliance portion, we just talked about how what even are your measurements of microplastics? Not to say that that's would be the policy or the what people are testing for, but just how do you enforce things if you're not super certain on what they
I
are?
think it's really hard. It's a chicken and egg problem. It's
Yeah.
also something that we are trying to figure out, right? If you want to do testing and right now testing is still expensive, who's going to pay for it?
Right.
Like, how do you generate a wave? So if you think about it, we have consumer at the end. We tell consumers, you and I, we need to be conscious consumer. We need to vote with our wallet, which is important that we can send a signal to, brands and product manufacturers. But product manufacturers, when they like, go to their suppliers, they need to be asking their suppliers to make sure the ingredients are clean, right? And
Yeah.
then suppliers need to be asking their suppliers. But then who's gonna like start this move,
Right.
right? I've talked to after we did the testing, I actually went to a supplier conference and I talked to the suppliers and I was asking them, are they doing any testing? And they said, oh, we're willing to do the testing if our customer is asking for, right? So then you actually need the manufacturers and then also the suppliers, all of everybody needs to be educated and then figure out who's going to pay for the bill, and
Right.
then to set up sort of a positive wave, a circular motion almost.
Yeah.
And then policy can be really effective, or even retailer policies, right, to can be really effective in this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, super useful. Circling back, just kind of wanted to ask a few final questions about Million Marker. What is the North Star metric? Where are you heading? What are some big next steps for the company overall?
So for us now is finish our clinical trial.
Okay.
Um,
What is it composed of?
So right now we are running a clinical trial. So we run two.
Okay.
We run one that's establishing like using the test can actually help people reduce exposures. We were able to establish that, which is really encouraging.
Oh, and so there are correlate. That is
Mhm.
correlated. Oh, wow, amazing.
So we got that published, which is pretty awesome. But through that study, we realized people actually need hand holding. People need the education, need the hand holding. So now we're on sort of we call it phase 2 of the clinical trial, that we actually build an education program with coaching, with online curriculum, and to help people reduce exposure along with the testing. And then we're also adding, since this podcast is called SciFox
Right.
podcast, we actually added SciFox tests along with the intervention, trying to show that, hey, that since we can't do a prospective study to showing people, exposed people to these chemicals and then see, what's going on, how about by reducing exposures, can we see any changes
Yeah.
in their biomarkers? So we're doing that right now. We're expecting to finish the study Q3 2025. So that's pretty exciting. And the North Star for us is, I guess, how many people. Last year, if you ask me this question, I'll be answering like, okay, the survival of the company, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the typical
Yeah.
founder mode.
Stay alive
Right.
is the North Star. Now that I think we will stay alive, the North Star would be how many people we can serve and how many people we can actually change their behavior. Because from our the first study that we were able to show, once people use the test, they actually more than 50% have changed their lifestyle to reuse better products, and people have increased their environmental health literacy, and people have using better products and eating out less, using water filters and all these good stuff.
Yeah. Will we see a AI agent that takes all of this information and then kind of gives you a full stack plan? If you're working in cohesion with SciFox, you have a blood test and this, the actual actionable part becomes harder. Right now, you have two plays. That's something you've all dabbled with. You're interested in at all?
I think that would be really cool to
Yeah.
do it, but I think same as any other AI related stuff, right? You have to be cautious with what's the actual truth.
Right.
What if the AI just start making things
Making
up
things
for
up.
you?
Right. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Amazing. Well, I want to jump into some rapid fires if that's right with you. I kind of just ask you a question, just give me kind of a short response. Awesome. What drives you most?
Mail-in marker?
Do you think years 2025 moving forward, do you think getting a PhD is worth it?
To me, I still think it's worth it because it gives you a different perspective. And sometimes I think one thing is that you don't know what you don't know.
Right. That's fair.
I felt like doing a PhD is allow you to understand what you don't know.
If money wasn't a thing, what would you be doing?
Mail-in marker.
What's your biggest regret?
Not learning an instrument.
Oh, yeah? Did you play any at all?
I don't play any, but I wish I did.
Did anyone else around you play?
My husband play, and then a lot of my friends play. I felt like I'm the
You're
only
the only
one who
one.
don't know.
There's still time. There's still time.
Yeah.
What were your parents' philosophies when they raised you?
Do whatever I want.
Has that helped with Million Marker?
Yes.
Very nice. Amazing. And the last final segment that I like to always do is I basically ask you to teach me something interesting. I'll give you some time to think if you want, and then just give me 20, 30 seconds, teach me something that we have not talked about, kind of unrelated. So go ahead and teach me something interesting.
Maybe a fact,
Sure,
which
yeah.
is also related to what we talked about.
Sure.
This is based on Dr. Shauna Swan's research. Is this anal genital distance is
Okay.
actually related to chemical exposures, your fertility, and also your sexual function.
Oh, wow.
That's the distance between your anus to your testicles. So, or anus to your genital distance, and then that's the first physical measure people can actually check.
Oh, wow.
For these conditions.
That's very good to know.
So I thought that was really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the pod. We'd love to have you again. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing.